some of the stuff I did, particularly in the noughties, I'd be locked up for now. I mean, I for a photo call, I blocked the entire Albert Bridge. I brought the traffic to a standstill.
Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, Ben, thanks for having me. I mean, the third time you've feasted on my faux wisdom, so I'm pleased to be back again. It feels like a home to me.
Well, what a lovely looking home that is behind you. I thought that was a virtual background when I first saw it, but it's not. But that looks like a cool room. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on for, as you say, the third time. As I mentioned in my intro, you've just done this really intriguing podcast documentary, Outrage Inc. With the BBC, looking at, I suppose that, well, yeah, the timeline, the story of PR stunts through the ages. Just tell us about it first of all.
Well, it's less looking at the PR stunts through the ages. Yeah, it's available now on BBC Sound, so get the plug-in at the top. Produced by a friend of mine, Alison Vernon-Smith, who approached me to say, look, we'd like you to do an archive out. Have you got any ideas? And I said, look, I've got a very profound idea. I think that in my industry, there's a lot of talk about publicity stunts, and I've been involved with a few of them in my youth. And I said, the trade press and various sort of channels get very excited about the next big thing that's done to launch, a beer brand or a new website or a store or whatever. But I said, they all feel pretty flimsy now on the basis, and I think a younger audience do not view it in the same way that some older should we say participants in the craft think about it. I mean, make no mistake, there's still some great PRs doing some very clever things, earning media, but what I wanted to examine is the impact of the stunt that actually changed the weather, that actually wasn't just a brief explosion of idea, but a mind bomb that actually changed society. And of course, with the heat that's on the various, should we say, pressure groups, partisan acting being the one case that now, if you are using protest as a weapon, you can end up with a criminal record. It is very much in the ether at the moment, and I wanted to explore, as being the sort of frustrated history teacher that I still believe that there are more lessons that we can learn from history than contemporary events. But I thought it'd be a good idea if I trolled through the BBC archive to land a thesis that there was something about the history of publicity stunts for political gain, for how should we say, changing society's attitude towards a view that needed to be explored. And that's what I've done. Guided away by Yada Yada, the production company. It was broadcast a couple of weeks ago, but now the glories of BBC Sounds, it'll stay there for a year. So anybody who didn't see it or hear it can find it now.
Yeah, well, I've listened to it, obviously, as you would, and it's really interesting. I encourage anyone to go and have a listen. It's definitely it's a different take on the theme of stunts, and it goes a bit deeper because, as you allude to in your intro there, the PR sector is. I'm a bit more pro it than you, perhaps, but we'll have that discussion in a moment. Is doing some interesting work currently around creativity and stunts and earned media, as you say. But your hypothesis that it goes a bit deeper and gets a bit more serious than that, or at least it used to, is an interesting one. For anyone out there, we can't sort of summarize all of the stunts because you went through quite a few of them on Outrage Inc. in the show. But just give us a few highlights of the ones that really stick in their memory, that perhaps were your favourite, or maybe they all were your favourites. I don't know.
Well, look, I mean, what we see, things go in sort of 30-year cycles in some way. That sort of creativity that you talk about used in PR now has its roots going much further back you know, there are 7 story themes and 7 motivations, and they continually connect. And of course, each generation want to own their own history. But whilst what I wanted to bring forward, you know, was, you know, the sacrifice and the endeavor, you know, to make an impact. So we started the suffragettes, which was obviously a group of women who worked extremely hard to ensure that women got the vote, and some of the extraordinary things that they did, you know, and also some very violent things they did, you know, setting fire to buildings, throwing themselves in front of racehorses, you know, to bring the media attention, because that's the theme going through it. You know, how do you get on the front page, and what is the sacrifice needed? So I stretch from women's rights. I go through Greenham Common. Again, I thought it was very pertinent that, in fact, the women of Greenham Common, you know, who were doing stunts daily as a embrace the base, you know, to stop the usage of intercontinental ballistic missiles on British soil, painted some of those warheads with pink porridge, and at one point Michael Hesstein threatened to shoot them. So there's a lot of sort of similarities, I guess, with Palestine Action, who invaded Bryce Norton to paint those planes. The thing that I love about you know, a great publicity stunt is the theatre in your head, that mind bomb that explodes, and that's a real great use of creativity in PR. But I think my favorite, really, that I discovered was an amazing political group and action called Political Beauty, based in Germany, helmed by a man called Philip Ruch. And he was influenced by someone I was going to work with back in the 80s, an amazing artist, comedian, performer, theatrical guy called Philip Schillinger, who sadly died before he came to London, when I was dabbling in that more creative theatre, contemporary theatre field. But he was Philip Ruch was believed in performance, believed in the theatre of the mind, and he got very anxious about the rise of the right, the ARD, in Germany. And I interviewed him and managed to get access to him. Many people gave their generous time. Joey Skaggs is in there, Led by Donkeys are in there as well, and the Yes Men, of course. But was very, very interesting to say that as the commentary in Germany was about, for Germany was now, we should forget the Holocaust. We have paid our sins. And they were saying, we don't. And he said that we've got to keep the wounds open. We must never forget the sins of our past. And he could see that there was a movement in Germany that were moving away from the memories of the Holocaust. So what did he do? Very carefully, he found a piece of land literally in front of Berghocker's house in some rural part of Germany. And if anybody has been to the Berlin Memorial for the Holocaust, big slabs of iron concrete, you know, stuck in the middle of Berlin, not far from Hitler's bunker, he rebuilt it in virtually the garden of Bernd Hucker. So Bernd Hucker has to wake up every day to see and be reminded of the Holocaust by having the exact replica of the Holocaust Museum in his front garden. And he's tried everything to erase this, but the planning and the organization, which included being able to keep it there forever, hasn't allowed to do it. And I thought it was just sort of genius of the thought and the impact. And of course, it generated global attention. I remember it at the time. But going through how he pulled off was great. The Yes Men, I interviewed the Yes Men, who back in the 90s were obsessed about consumer culture and about sort of identity politics, and they were the ones that sort of replaced the voice boxes inside Barbie dolls and G.I. Joes, the action men of the time, and were slipping them back into toy stores. So little boys and girls were going home with a G.I. Joe with a feminine voice box talking about fashion and lipstick. And of course, little girls were going home with action men G.I. Joes with a female voice, and Barbies obviously with the Barbies going home with the G.I. Joe voice. That generated huge attention. I remember it at the time. But of course, these became seeds. These became seeds of change, whether it was greening women or whatever. And what you have to do, and what we all have to do, I guess, in PR now, is to continue the signal. Things are just explode, an idea explode, but a great publicity stunt carries on like you throw a stone in the middle of the lake and the ripples go out. And I think that's the core of a great idea. And that's a lot of these things that went on. XR, which I gave some advice to. We went back and looked at the Occupy movement in St. Paul's, and talking about, you know, the sacrifice of the chances, the arresting, but why it was important and why it was to create those mind bombs. And I think Led by Donkeys are probably the most powerful modern example of that. The COVID war, the Ukrainian process, placing the colors of the Ukrainian flag. So cars went through it, causing this huge Ukrainian flag outside the Russian embassy that generated attention and Instagram sort of coverage, and there's thousands of sort of films about it. And it is about how do you force an idea into the public consciousness. So XR were a classic example of that, by hijacking the bridges in London and the pink boat. And it got people thinking and talking about it. And I thought that the creativity and the sacrifice and the endeavor to make that needed to be celebrated, because we can all learn from that. We can all learn from how, in any part of the work we do, what's the point of doing it? Does it do something more than just sell more stuff? Does it have more interest?
Isn't there there's an interesting comparison there, isn't there, between the commercial PR stunts and the ones that try to bring social change? Are they just not two very different genres?
They're inspired, but they need the same level of creativity. They need that same sort of challenging thought, that same way of brainstorming, coming up with the idea and then linking into the media campaigns that sort of drive that attention. And of course, now we have the splinter net, we have the power of social media, we have the power of the visual image through things like Instagram, we have the conversations that have been captured on TikTok and YouTube and whatever. There are more channels. So therefore, more channels is how do you express an idea that can operate in many forms. It's not now about hijacking the front page of the Sun or the Guardian. I mean, that's in the days when there were, you know, millions of eyeballs on that. But the competition and the noise you've got to get about, your idea needs to be great, whatever it is. And what we have to observe is the fact we need to get outside of our silos. The only thing I have, and there's some great work being done in PR at this moment in these areas, but we do have a little bit of a sort of attitude that it stays in our community. What we have to do, we need to make it as big as we possibly can, and that's the challenge. That's the difficulty.
I want to come on to that in a minute, but just one last question about some of the stuff you talk about on Outrage Inc. As you were talking there, some of the ideas are incredibly simple, aren't they? And some of them are incredibly complicated. In terms of the planning laws and the activation, the logistics, but some of them are outside the Russian embassy. It's comparatively much simpler. It's some paint, albeit some paint that doesn't damage too many things. But is there? I just wonder: do they need to be complicated? Are they better simple, or does it not matter?
I mean, the simple things are the most difficult to deliver, and they come from inspiration, and they come from a creative environment to allow those ideas to flourish. There's always a complication now, because some of the stuff I did, particularly in the noughties, I'd be locked up for now. I mean, I for a photo call, I blocked the entire Albert Bridge. I brought the traffic to a standstill. Got great pictures of a car on two wheels running across the bridge, disappeared. I didn't seek any permission. I didn't know, but I wouldn't. You wouldn't do that now, because you'd be arrested. There's so much CCTV coverage around. They could follow you, could find you. The police are there. There's so many security issues about safety in London. It's crawling with people who'd be on that in a microsecond. So you have to be brave. You have to be organized, because you could get locked up. You could face a criminal charge. You could have a criminal record. And, projections I'm not a big fan of, but, even now a projection, you can be sued for trespass. So there's a lot more, legislation, a lot more ambulance chasing lawyers who can come down on you a ton of bricks with, and there's a lot more, how should you say, the state activity to stop this happening. But going back to your original point, there is always organization, even in the simplest idea. And in terms of even the idea, you have to evaluate the risk now, because you are placing a lot of people in risk, and it can backfire. And now there's 1,000 voices to tell you you're an idiot and create a thing. But all publicity is good publicity, except the obituary notice. I've always said it. Really is, because now negativity flourishes. So there are a lot more social conditions to think about. There's a lot more cultural conditions to think about that go into the mix to come up with a great idea that's got to explode and be big.
Right. So I just looking at the PR stunt genre, if that is the right phrase now, seems to me you have a slightly complicated relationship with it now, because in some ways you're the sort of the father of the modern PR stunt.
Or grandfather, someone called me today.
Maybe. But you're kind of a bit over them, aren't you? Or aren't you? I can't quite work it out. You're still passionate. You're still very passionate about them.
I'm passionate about the craft. I'm passionate about PR done well, because now there's there was a joke that there's more PRs 100 yards away from you than there are rats in London. I mean, I think that everybody's got an outbreak of PR in their life. So therefore, there's a lot of people flooding the market. When it's done well, it's absolutely outstanding, and I would pat anybody on the back who achieves that and gets awards, your awards, PR Week awards, should I say that, whoever the drum awards, whatever they're deserved.
PRmoment and Creative Moment Awards lead the way, Mark. But yeah, absolutely.
Of course they do. Yeah. And the bottom line then is there's a lot of really bad PR being done, and that affects
within stunts. I mean, I agree with you.
And stunts, exactly. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's more difficult now to persuade clients to be brave. I thought the best publicity stunt I've seen in a long time was, and I'm sure a lot of money was thrown at it to make it work, was do you remember the Coldplay moment for the astronomers, the CEO of Astronomer, the American company, and their marriage and that company being thrown into the global spotlight? Well, that Gwyneth Paltrow sort of moment where Gwyneth Paltrow took on the part of which HR or whatever. I mean, that was incredibly brave to do, because it could have backfired, but somehow everybody was laughing at it. It was what I call a great mind bomb. So I think that it is always about the celebration is one thing, but we don't want to be hampered by poor activity that actually spreads and maybe stops a chief executive thinking about that's a great idea. I think brands now are cautious, more than cautious than ever, to allow creativity to flourish.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. I think going back to my original thought, that most of the stunts still come from a very small number of firms, don't they? I mean, the example you raised a minute ago, that was Ryan Reynolds, wasn't it? His production company did that one with Gwyneth Paltrow, I think. But in London anyway, it still seems to be a lot of the stunts come from a relatively small number of agencies, and I don't know. I find it hard to assess where we are historically with that. I mean, I basically my if they make me laugh, I kind of like them. Do you know what I mean? But maybe I think about
that's the heart of it. It has to entertain us, and it has to entertain, on a large scale now for it to go viral. because if it works, everybody's talking about it. And of course, there'll be people, naysayers, it's a grab of what's the signal. But I think that, and also, if we look at the algorithms now that run across all our lives, I mean, I often say to people, the person that brands have to think about first is the algorithm, is the editor now, is that they prime negativity. And I think of some of the Balenciaga stunts that have failed, and I've often commented, offered commentary, and I always say it's not going to kill a brand. Every crisis there's an opportunity now, to take it to another place. But the bottom line, there seems to be a lot more, virality and negativity and things going wrong or people falling over, and that there doesn't seem the same clicks in positivity.
Well, there never has been, is there? I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but bad sells papers, and the algorithm rewards engagement. So therefore, your negative story is always going to get more than your positive, isn't it?
I think, I possibly agree with that argument, but the bottom line is, I think, more the straight jacket from brands. If you think of a brand like Brewdog, who grew up on stunt after stunt, Paddy Power recently, stunters at Greg's, and the stuff that Taylor Herring did with Greg, all really great stuff. I mean, that remarkable stunt, I was in the corporate PR for Beano at the time, but the stunt Taylor Herring did, the letter to William Rees-Mogg, very simple, a great idea. And those are difficult to conjure up now. And I'm going to say a couple of things are controversial here. Partly why there's less creativity, because people are not spending the same amount of time in the office. If you're in the office every day, you share ideas, you say something random. Some of the best stunts I did came from people who came in, walking into it and said, do you know what I think we should do today? I've been thinking about it on the tube. And you come in, and that isn't necessary. That might not happen on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And I think that, culture is in the absolutely the pillaries of that office, of people being in there, and I think there's a lot more structure, sometimes rightly so, in terms of how offices are run and people conduct themselves, the hours a day they want to work. I mean, there's these, I'm not talking about then, I'm talking about now. And you do have to be more collaborative. And I don't think the great ideas are going to come from a Zoom, brainstorm where people are looking at their emails or they're looking at their WhatsApp. When people are not engaging on Zoom. I mean, it's a very useful form of communication. Here we are on Google. And I've just I was late because I was on a 17-minute Zoom before that. But the basis.
No, I hear you. The collaboration is important, and that social environment does lead to I've no doubt some ideas as those sort of friendship groups materialize and people talk and compare experiences and cultures and all that type of thing. Just going back to the PR stunt that's happening right now. And it links back to your moment of what you were talking about a minute ago about the algorithms. Has it sort of reinvented itself to an extent, because that earned media creative on social, earned media social has become so important within that virtuous cycle of media coverage, the algorithm, getting momentum within a story. And I suppose it's a slight cliche, but creating those moments for brands. It seems to me that the PR stunt over the last couple of years is really back in fashion.
Never went out of fashion.
Okay.
I don't think it ever went out of fashion. And there's some, really, good agencies, really pushing that creative. My old sort of, I gave him his first break, Paul McEntee, Here Be Dragons. I mean, I love Paul, and I love the energy and passion he puts into things, and I think that he's doing a very good job as an independent, trying to push clients hard and find the right people to do it. I think now there is a science that has to align to that. Yeah. I think that there's a lot more. I mean, the first thing I'd do is don't go to AI for your ideas. You know, don't go to Perplexity, don't go to ChatGPT, don't go to a large language model, build it within yourself. But also you do have to think about how something lands and who starts to talk about it and who you involve with the stunt, who is a significant influencer, who can give you, I mean, even Led by Donkeys talked about that in terms of some of their original things. They needed, you know, people like Carol Vorderman, you know, who had a big following to support that. They always, you know, they are, you know, looking all the time to get that sort of visibility through social media, because, you know, you could be doing something and it's a great stunt and there's certainly no, you know, cameras rolling as they were when I was doing things, when every newspaper had a photographer and you can get everybody to a big photo call and tip them off, as it were. Now it's very much done inside a silo, and how do you break out that silo? Who gives it visibility? You know, how do you keep that edge?
Yeah, not easy, not easy. Just going back to Outrage Inc. I was really intrigued by your sort of overall hypothesis, I suppose, that society kind of forgets the impact that some of these publicity stunts have on the changing culture, all those societal moments, and the changing of society over time. And I just wondered, maybe I was thinking too much, Mark, but is it more that people forget that they were publicity stunts? They kind of, those moments become so entwined into people's memories that it's not that they forget that those changes happened, it's that they forget that it was a publicity stunt that played an important role in that change happening.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point to make. I think, yes, I think on one level, it's a really successful action. Is it real? Is it a stunt? Is it meant to happen? You know, is this official? Is it not? Yeah, I think there's got to be a sort of a question, because that puts more energy into generating a conversation around it. But of course, every generation of publicists that I've ever looked at always use the media of the day to be the thing that throws it out. You know, so, you know, the suffragettes absolutely knew that newspapers were important, and of course newspapers of the time were looking for readership. And the same in terms of when some of the radio stunts happened in America in the 1940s, the boom in public radio, through to TV, through to movies and whatever. So it is a medium of the time. But I think that if you start declaring it as a publicity stunt, then you lose its power. It's an action. It's a mind bomb. It's a theatre of the mind.
Yeah, no one likes the publicity. No consumer likes it being known as a publicity stunt, do they?
I think consumers buy into a brand in a totally different way, because they're looking at values, what they stand for, and, you know, if the stunt doesn't align with that, there's a lot more guidelines now that you have to do when you're going through a creative process. You have to think of so many different ways that fits into the architecture of the brand.
Right. Just finishing on one thing, you alluded to it earlier, and you talked about it on Outrage Inc. is how UK laws are making it harder to do PR, to do publicity stunts, especially some of those at the sort of braver end of the spectrum. What do you think that's happening? What are the implications of it, would you say?
I think there's more corporate fear. And then certainly there are more, as I said, sort of legal implications that someone is going to take a private lawsuit out. There are security issues there that, you know, if you cross a line and waste police time, you know, what happens if you stop someone getting to a hospital appointment or an ambulance? You know, there's going to be a lawyer going to be down your throat. I have done a stunt in the past that's lost a senior person their job. Right. And I think that is something in the top of people's minds. I think that there's a lot more control the brand want over it. There's a little less trust in the frisson, the sort of, shall we say, the improvisation that's needed around it. There are just so many people exploring the downsides, and there are so many people wanting to prey on any mistake, creates a certain nervousness in brands. And I think the more point is that there is always a lawyer somewhere breathing down your neck, looking to take action on a very big brand if they get it wrong.
And then just briefly on top of that, there's the legal element as well, right? There's more legislation coming through that's making it tougher and tougher to do this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's what killed the great stuntsters who came out of the 1950s in America, people like Jim Moran, people in the 40s like Harry Reichenbach. You know, I think it started in America, and I think we've got the virus here. But I think that people want a certain element of danger, and of course that danger is too, you know, there's, you know, there is always a risk, and I think people generally are risk averse now because, you know, senior jobs, or you're sitting at the top of an organization, you know, you're sitting there for a certain amount of time. You don't want your time to come to an end early by frivolous notion that hasn't been well thought through. And
yeah, but at the same time, then there's potentially a smaller brand who's got less to lose, who are prepared to roll the dice. I don't know. Maybe there's this constant changeover.
That's very true, and they're always great to work for, but there isn't the budgets there. You know. So but there's also, you know, if you get your stunting right, you can build a whole reputation and build a business behind it. So, you know, the rewards are there, and that's certainly, you know, someone like, you know, Taylor Herring certainly cashed out on some outstanding work over a period of time.
Yeah, so I mean, both from the agency side, but also importantly for the brand as well. Yeah, I mean, there's I mean, you mentioned Brewdog earlier, Paddy Power. You know, they did a lot of other stuff right as well. They made good beer and all the rest of it. But the stunts were an important part of their story, weren't they?
Well, they go right back to Virgin.
Yeah,
look, you know, you have to look back, and the Virgin Empire's built on Richard Branson being a virtual showman, being like the circus B.T. Barnum, you know, in terms of donning dresses and going on balloon hikes and, you know, and launching, you know, fights against British Airways and stunts through that. So, you know, it was in the DNA of the Virgin brand, and it still sort of sticks for a certain generation who remember that. And you know, I wish I could think of more, but there's certainly a lot more that had that fun. And of course, fashion has been, you know, dangerous public stunts in terms of fashion.
Well, I think Greg's is a recent one where the stunt played such an important role in changing the public's perception of that brand, didn't it? Over a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, correct. Red Bull. I mean, look at Red Bull. I mean, Red Bull then had to invest huge amounts of money into some of their activities, like the airman thing, and then going into things like F1 and stuff like that, and football. So,
from a charity perspective, Oxfam, you talk about that Greenpeace. You talk about that on your piece on Outrage Inc, don't you? You know, so the rewards are there if you're brave enough, I suppose, is what you're saying, Mark. Still,
the rewards are always there if you're brave enough in whatever you do in life, Ben.
Brilliant, Mark Borkowski. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's always a pleasure to have such a freewheeling conversation, Ben. Always a joy.